Welcome. Our discussion today will focus on the Picayune Strand Restoration Project. This large-scale conservation initiative will provide landscape connectivity for hydrologic flow, wildlife movement, and contiguous conservation lands. However, as we explore, we will find that conflicting interests can arise even when ecological connectivity and conservation are at the forefront. The Picayune Strand is located in South Florida, to the southeast of Naples and to the west of the Big Cypress National Preserve. In the 1960s, land developers drained the area and platted a community known as Golden Gate Estates, in an attempt to sell homestead-style residential lots. This included extensive canal excavation and the construction of miles of shell rock roads. In the decades that followed, northern Golden Gate Estates was systematically developed. However, the seasonal flooding experienced in southwest Florida made the southern portion nearly undevelopable. Once this was realized, the damage had already been done. The wetlands had been drained and regional connectivity was severed by a grid of roadways and large canals, measuring 11 miles long and 8 miles wide. As you can see in these maps acquired from the Nature Conservancy's Climate Resilience Mapping tool, the gridded land disturbance of the Picayune Strand has had measurable effects on the connectivity and climate flow. The earthwork seems to have had a lesser effect on the local connectivity parameters, though the strand still scores lower than the conservation areas to the northeast. The Picayune Strand Restoration Project is a collaborative effort between the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District, with supportive input from numerous other organizations. In short, the project is plugging canals, filling ditches, removing roadways, and establishing 3 pump stations to return a semi-natural hydrologic connection between the developments to the north and the tidal wetlands to the south. While this is primarily a hydrologic connectivity endeavor, it will provide a number of other benefits towards regional conservation goals. Not only will the project expand the regional connectivity of protected lands by filling the protection gap between the South Belmead Preserve and the Waxahachie Strand State Preserve, it will also improve habitat quality for the Florida panther, wading birds, and other wetland-dependent species. However, not all species may benefit from this conservation initiative. In this interview, we would like to explore how conflicting interests arise even when conservation, habitat restoration, and landscape connectivity goals are seemingly in line at the onset of a project. We'll now give the floor to Dr. Monica Folk to allow her to describe her involvement with the Picayune Strand Restoration Project and how she fears some conservation goals may be given more consideration over others.
I came to be involved with the Picayune Strand Restoration Project because I was the contractor wildlife biologist for the Florida Forest Service to monitor and manage the red-cockaded woodpecker population on that property from 2010 to 2019. I've been pretty involved on the working group, which has been active for probably the last 5 years, 4 years maybe. And about 6 months ago, they disbanded that because they didn't want to hear from us anymore. So they, being the Water Management District and the Army Corps, jointly decided that this working group was now defunct. But we've been trying really hard to connect it back into these fairly intact other natural systems to the east. Because if you look to the west, we've got this megalopolis encroaching on us, every minute. You've got ag lands here to the south and more human development. And then this system down here is Rookery Bay, which is a really important ecological system, but has had major impairments and degradations for the last 50 years, and there's been lots of entities that have worked really hard to try to get Rookery Bay to be more functioning and to kind of fix it. So there's no RCWs on this side anymore, even though there used to be. There used to be a large population of RCWs on this side, just as much on this side. Panthers can't move across those canals and roads because it's so bisected, so they basically just move through it, and then they use this side of it. So I saw panthers all the time on this side, but I never saw a panther on this side. So anyway, that's where the restoration side comes in. The Belmead tract of Picayune never was subdivided as part of the land scam, but it's still been altered hydrologically. Like there's still, and also fire regime, like it was fire suppressed for about 50 years. The water comes into a settling pond, and this is the pump station, and it pumps the water out into these spreader basins. So they can manage the flow, right? The water being delivered from the canals into this, but it gradually seeps out of the spreader basin and naturally creates a hydrologic flow to the south. So that's all well and good, because everything below it should be a natural system that they're just redelivering the water to, and they've filled all the roads and canals. So if topography's been restored and they're using a natural schedule for managing volumes and running the pumps to deliver the water, it should be true ecological restoration. With maybe the exception that there are increased demands to move water quickly during storm events, which, you know, wouldn't quite naturally happen. They have to really bump up those pump schedules during storm events. What really threw the first big kink in the works of the restoration goals, as I understand it, was the huge hue and cry from some early model results by the ag fields down here. And they just started screaming and yelling that the Miller pump station was going to deliver the water through this sluway right here directly to their edge, and was going to completely take all of their ag fields and make them unusable. So the Army Corps of Engineers and Water Management District immediately perked up their things and said, we'll fix that. And they went and built this enormous berm, like 25 feet tall, huge amounts of dirt, a berm to completely wall off this important agriculture area from any impacts of the hydrology. The problem is, then the next time they ran the models, all that water that would normally have been delivered down into that system was going to stack up right here, because it got stopped by that giant berm, and back up and go much more slowly, you know, be delivered more slowly down to the system, back up. And it actually managed to find its way around this Pineland Ridge where the RCWs are, and go up and over the top and come down into this side of Belmead and flood the entire area where the entire RCW population is. And it wasn't a huge thing. Like, the models were really just saying about 6 inches of additional hydrology for about 6 months of the year. But the problem is, you take pinelands that are already stressed and you put 6 more inches of water on them for 6 months of the year when they're already underwater for 3 months of the year, and your pines are not going to survive that. And so it just was, it was a flipping the switch of a system that was maybe manageable and could have had minimal stress to this part of the preserve, the Picayune Strand, to all of a sudden catastrophic effects just from the altered models. And so we spent 2 years trying to come up with solutions, right? Because, you know, some of us were advocating for the RCWs. The Florida Forest Service was actually advocating just for their preserve not to be flooded. Like, I mean, they were looking at the models and just saying, wait, you're going to flood huge parts of our property. That was not part of the plan. We had proposed to take Miller Boulevard, which is an existing road, and as part of the restoration was supposed to be removed. And we just said, don't remove it. Don't remove it. Leave it in place from right here all the way up the ridge, but then take it out from below where the RCW population ends and allow that water to then come across it. And it's not going to damage the ag areas because there's a berm there. So then it can restore itself into this natural thing, but at least protect this part of Picayune by not removing Miller, which is, you know, that's kind of just enough of a little bit of a topographic grade that it acts almost like a little berm. And we thought we had a compromise. We thought, in fact, it should have cost them less money to not have to remove that road, because they were going to have to do that anyway. So almost everybody in the group was happy. We were trying to get the model to be rerun a couple times because there were glitches in the model that clearly something wasn't working right. So we'd keep coming back together to look at the reruns on the model, but it looked like something we could all live with. And that's when it felt like somebody walked into the room and said, nope, we're not doing any of that. We're going back to our original plan. We're going to take 3 years of the working groups negotiations and put them in the trash. And we're going to go back to doing whatever we want to do. And they basically just shut us down. So we haven't heard a thing about what's going to happen now. If I had to write down some lessons learned, I guess I would say that they should have, in the initial restoration design, looked at the bigger picture. It seemed like it was very narrowly focused in the beginning to just move water. Like it really was just trying to solve the flooding problems that were in this issue. They called it restoration. They made it part of the greater SERP restoration, but it seemed very, as you can tell, it's very engineered. Like it is, an engineered solution to moving water, not just let's fill canals, let's put the topography back the way it was and let water find its own way, right? That would be a little more natural restoration. But they're deciding how much water to put where and when. So that seems a little more engineered than it needs to be. They should have probably realized that this was going to be a problem at the beginning when you look at the way the water flows. Like here's Rookery Bay where you wanted to go and here's where the water is. Like it's got to go. Like that should have maybe been thought about or addressed somehow. But again, they were continually relying on the models, and those models are so dependent on tiny little tweaks. And if you tweak just one tiny little thing, or you rerun a topo survey and it shows you have 2 inches less of topography in one particular choke spot than you thought, it completely changes the model outputs. And so it was like every time they would refine the data and rerun the models, it would say completely different things. And so making all those decisions just based on those really glitzy models became really problematic, because it just meant we had to keep redeciding and redeciding every time there was a new model run. I guess I would like there to have been more ecological buy-in and consensus from the beginning, that they weren't just trying to manage water, that they were actually trying to maximize the ecological benefits of the entire program, including endangered species that were adjacent to the project. Because then someone couldn't have just walked into the room and said, sorry, I'm going to throw out the 3 years of work that you've all done. And it was like 12 different agencies meeting together for those 3 years. So for one person to just be able to override all that, it seems a little undemocratic, for lack of a better word. Like there just didn't seem to be top-down buy-in to our process. It seemed more like they were just trying to keep us busy so that we didn't, cause problems or something. I don't know, but it definitely didn't result in any positive contribution, which is disappointing to those of us that participated. The actual physical restoration of filling all the ditches and canals is going really well, and the spreader basins are working well. Part of maybe a future concern is we don't quite understand how the schedule for the pumps is going to work, and like how exactly are they trying to mimic that as a natural system. It seems like it's still very engineered. So just making sure that that's ecologically based would, I think, reassure some of us that the restoration could at least function as much as it can. They are possibly going to allow us to reestablish prescribed fire on this part of the site, which hasn't seen it for 100 years. That would be a great thing. There was even some possibility that we could actually get RCWs established over on this side too, because there are pine trees there still. And once we remove all the cabbage palms, if we can reinstitute fire, there is a possibility to expand the RCW habitat, and through recruitment clusters. If you know anything about RCWs, we can kind of reintroduce them into the landscape by providing artificial cavities kind of in the groupings that they would naturally create them.